Sacred Heart is proud to sponsor Pensacola Histories in recognition of the Daughters of Charity who brought their mission of care to Pensacola over 90 years ago.
Hello and welcome to our continuing story of the evolution of recreation here in our local area, Pensacola, Escambia County. And in the previous two episodes, we've talked about how recreation began for our forefathers here in the 1820s. How very primitive things were enjoyed at the family and at the church, how things improved radically with the coming of the lumbering era when people had more money, the opening of the opera house, the coming then of field sports, if you will. We talked about a little bit later on the first golf courses we had here, the coming of the yacht club, the evolution of high school sports early in the 20th century, and then of course the development by the city of Pensacola of the Osceola Golf Course, and then of course Legion Field. And as we moved into the 1930s, the coming of a city recreation program. And that's pretty much where we left off last time. And of course, the 1930s will be remembered for not only this beginning of a city recreation, which came at a very wonderful time since it was so valuable to people who were scraping and scrimping to try and just get by in bad economic times. And these sports and recreation programs were so helpful to people. It's at the same time, and we won't dwell on this a lot, but it was at almost the same time that local sports interests turned to having Pensacola become the home of a national professional golfing tournament. And of course, these golf tournaments were held at the Pensacola Country Club. They were not consistent every year, but over the years, over a number of years, well into almost into the 21st century, such tournaments would be held here to, of course, to publicize the city and to publicize the value of the sport itself. Now, as we move through the 1930s, we began also to see the field of high school sports begin to expand, because now we'd seen the local teams able to move to other communities which are reasonably close by, and high school sports becomes a point of real attraction, so that by the time we get into the mid-1940s and beyond, going to a high school football game on a Friday night when Coach Jim Scoggins and his fine teams were performing here, this became the social event of the week for so many people who actually packed that stadium out there at Pensacola High School and just people enjoyed it so much. Well, by the time we moved into the 1940s, at the end of World War II, we begin to see other things happening. The Navy itself now becomes a sponsor of sports, of intercollegiate style sports, with the coming of the Pensacola Goshawks, which played, of course, other military units, and also played a couple of times against actual college teams. And many people, well, we can't delve into this very deeply, many people here will remember that the Pensacola Goshawks also had, for a time, the presence of Roger Staubach, who went on to have a great career with the Dallas Cowboys. So Pensacola focused in that way. Now, as we move into the mid-1940s, the city's program in recreation begins to evolve even further, and they reach a point where they want to have a much broader, more in-depth program led by on the sports committee by people like Bill Noonan and Frank Fricker. And they said to Julian Olson, who had been running the sports program part-time, they said, "Julian, we need you full-time." Well, Julian said, "Well, I have this obligation at the YMCA," and so poor old Julian, well, he had to kind of flip a coin, and he did, and finally chose to become the first full-time director of city recreation. And Julian did an absolutely wonderful job. He created all sorts of games, of tournaments, and track and field and tennis. And not only that, but he painted a picture for the future, so that people could see what Pensacola might have once it was able to budget and plan economically for such things as more golf facilities, tennis courts, more facilities for youth baseball and other youth sports. And so those things began. And as Julian's vision began to spread across the community, men and women in various civic organizations said, "Well, this is a wonderful idea. Let's us provide the background, the material, the money for youth sports on a broader basis." And this, of course, is when we begin to see the coming of Little League, the Dizzy Dean League, all of the things that related to various levels of age. And this is when people like Bill Bond and Terry Scruggs stepped in and became coaches and served in this way for many, many years, assisting so many hundreds of young boys and girls who got not only the lessons in sports, but also led us persons in citizenship and core values. They just did a wonderful job, as is still the case well into the 21st century. Over the years, when Julian Olson retired, he was succeeded by a man named Jimmy Hitzman, who did a fine job. Then came Red Vickery, and Red Vickery, of course, was the director for many, many years. He was succeeded upon retirement by Jody Skelton, and now we passed into a new generation beyond that. Meanwhile, along the way, as all of these activities matured, and as the golf tournament required greater administration, people with sports interests formed what became known as the Pensacola Sports Association. And this went through a series of developments, and of course it developed the background for not only big-time golf, but also it began to fan out so that it provided interest and facilities and leadership for all manner of youth sports and other sports as well. And Ray Palmer is the director of the Sports Association as we tell our story well into the 21st century. Well, as we move forward, we find that, of course, we have other organizations coming on stream. With the coming of the Pensacola Junior College, we have a whole addition to the opportunity for intercollegiate sports. And, of course, the PJC became a part of a conference of junior colleges, community colleges along the Panhandle, a relationship which makes PJC a very formidable opponent and a source of wonderful entertainment for those who see not only basketball, which, of course, is their primary sport, but also they are very active in other sports that have come on stream, sports for men and women, and these of course have included golf and volleyball and tennis and swimming. All of these things have moved step by step, and the junior college has been part of it. And when UWF, the University of West Florida, opened in 1967, they followed in the same format. The first president, Harold Crosby, was very much interested in intercollegiate sports and saw to it that the programs there got off on a very solid footing. And the first basketball coach, Marvin Beck, had been a coach of a high school state championship team, and Marvin Beck literally set the table for what was to come at that community place. Now, we haven't mentioned much about swimming, except to say that early in the 20th century, the YMCA had helped to establish programs in swimming with the use of Bayview Park as the site. Well, one of the things that the community just lacked, and people they just felt badly about this for years, was the fact that we did not have any swimming pools. And people said, well, it's wonderful to be able to swim in the Gulf and swim in the bayous and so forth, but you can't really become a collegiate or intercollegiate swimmer unless you have the availability of a pool. Well, the YMCA struggled with this and struggled, and finally, early into the 1950s, as they built new facilities, in a second step in that, they finally got around to building the first pool that was available for the proper public. At the same time, of course, the Navy said we've got to do this as well, and so a pool was placed at the Navy. And then, of course, in sequence, the Salvation Army in 1972 raised the funds to build a pool for servicing all manner of teams and youth sports and others, and for seniors as well. They put that in place on their West Side facility. And then, of course, moving along, the city finally got into the business of having a pool, and the Cecil Hunter Pool was erected as a public pool just off of Blunt Street on the east side. So we have come into swimming. Not only do we have the facilities, but as all of that has come together, we have developed, as Julian Olson and others predicted would happen, we began to develop a quality swimming, intercollegiate, competitive swimming program, so that we find many, many fine young people, boys and girls, men and women, being trained in the facilities locally through a variety of different sources, and the local swimming clubs are going on to doing great things. Now, early on, I mentioned that the YMCA had instigated training in boxing, and of course they continued on with that, kind of on and off, if you will, until the early 1930s. And then in 1931, when the bridges were built across to Santa Rosa Peninsula and finally onto Santa Rosa Island, the YMCA and the community itself took this as an opportunity to foster more boxing. People needed something to do on a Wednesday or Thursday night. They wanted something that was wholesome, that was enjoyable, and was inexpensive. So the Y began a wonderful program that was allied with the Golden Gloves program nationally. They put up a ring on the beach very close to the casino, and there was a boxing night, and people, of course, all they had to do was drive their automobile across the bridge, pay the toll, and they were there, and the boxing, of course, was free. And many, many fine young boxers came out of that particular program. program. And by tracing that, of course, still further, as we came into the late part of the 20th century into the 21st, successful boxers like Roy Jones can be said to have had their beginnings way back when the Y had their ideas back in 1903. Well, moving still forward, we've had a number of times here now when we celebrate the enjoyment here of automobile racing. Now, that began for us in a very short-lived arrangement in the early 1960s when the Fiesta of Five Flags and a number of young men who loved sports cars came together and sponsored a series of sports car races, which were held out on the old Corey Field track there. And these did not last long, but they were fun, and they made a lot of people aware of the enjoyment of watching people employ their skills in automobile racing. Then, of course, just shortly thereafter, local entrepreneurs built, first of all, some go-kart racing tracks, and then came the Five Flags Speedway, which became a very successful enterprise on the west side, and of course, which is still that today. Now, as we move forward into the 21st century, we have other things coming upon us. We have all kinds of other sports, other facilities, wonderful tennis facilities such as the Roger Scott Center near the airport, which came into being in the 1960s as a result of the planning of the City Recreation Board and, of course, financing by the City of Pensacola. It has been expanded a number of times. The only thing that didn't come about there, because was that in the original planning, alongside of the Roger Scott courts, there was to have been a 9-hole par 3 golf course. Unfortunately, economic times and a change in city council membership canceled that, and that never came to be. Now, of course, as we move a little bit further on, we find the county within the last 25 years seriously getting into recreation as well. They now have a very effective county recreation program, which links into what the leaders in various subdivisions do, and we see all sorts of sports programs and parks and recreation areas out in our county areas as well. And one of the things, of course, that came about from that was the Brosenham Center to the west, and then, of course, shortly thereafter, the development of what they call the Equestrian Center, where people by the hundreds come to enjoy sports related to horsing, and that has become a major part of sports and fun and activities here in current times. Now, probably the most recent one that has begun to really flower here, where the sport that has begun to flower here, is soccer. And that, of course, began once again with city leagues with the young kids, one youngster learning how to play the game. And then, of course, this now has spread to high schools and also on to the junior college and the college. And people are now beginning to look upon soccer in the United States as something, not just something to be enjoyed by the European nations, but rather something in which the United States will have a much greater effect. Now, all of this has come together. You see, we have people who enjoy all of the things we've talked about before. We're still doing the same things that our ancestors were doing back in the 1830s and 40s. We're still enjoying card games. We're still enjoying board games. Certainly music has taken its place. We have, beginning in the 1930s, we developed the Pensacola Little Theater. A little bit later on, we developed the Pensacola Museum of Art. All of these things are part of a broad program of people having fun. And of course, as we come to the second decade, or close to the second decade of the 21st century, the question is, how are we going to make things even bigger and better, and how are we going to promote the funding of such things? Because unfortunately, many of the programs that we talk about do require money, and we also have to think in terms of how we prevent further pollution in the community, and maybe our sports will be a means of doing that as well. So our story began, as I say, beginning in the time of Andrew Jackson. We have moved forward for a period of almost 190 years, and sports and recreation are part of life in Pensacola, far more so than they were with our ancestors, but they're changing, and it gets better all the time.